So we're a minute early, but without further ado, I'd like to welcome Paul Sonnier for the fourth wave panel. Hi, good morning, Paul.
Good morning, Jerry. Thank you.
How are you today?
I'm doing very well. How about yourself?
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, sunny here in New York right now, so hopefully that stays the case for the rest of the day and the rest of the week, of course. So Paul's going to be interviewing Eric Novik from Generable and Sergey Aksenov from Novartis. I believe they should both be here. So I'm going to hand over to you, Paul, and to get the show on the road, so to speak.
Yeah, well, thank you, Jerry. So it's great having you as the host, replacing the amiable Stan Kachnowski, as I described him in my event notice. So fantastic to be here. And for folks that don't know me, I'm best known as the founder of the almost 100,000 member digital health group on LinkedIn. And about 10 years ago, I renamed it from wireless health to digital health, and thereby sort of kicked off the digital health meme globally. And so when you hear that term, you can sort of thank me for that. It was a disused term at the time. And I just felt that was the best descriptor for all the technology, digital technology that we're seeing changing health, healthcare, and of course, pharma, life sciences. So the full spectrum, including consumer health and how society is being impacted. So I'm now a senior fellow at HitLab. Great to be a part of the organization. And also very happy to be joined by Eric Novik, CEO and founder of Generable, and Sergey Aksenov, who is Senior Director, Early Development Pharmacometrics at the Novartis Institutes for Biomedical Research. So Eric, you and I and Sergey had a great conversation yesterday, really enjoyable. And so why don't we start off with you introducing yourself, and then Sergey can follow, and then we can jump into some questions about what you're both doing.
Excellent. Well, thanks, Paul, and thanks, HitLab, for having us. Appreciate it. My name is Eric Novik. I am the founder and CEO of Generable. My background is in mostly statistics. I was at Columbia University Stats department, and I worked in a number of different areas, but in the past 5 years or so, working in early drug development. And that's what I'm kind of excited to tell you about more.
Fantastic. Sergey, I think you're on mute, so if you want to go right on it.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks. Happy to be here on this panel with Eric and you. I am currently the lead modeling simulation scientist for early development in neurology at Novartis. And I was trained as a physicist, which was great because it taught me to solve problems by looking under the hood. Found it very useful. And I have spent the past 20 years working in academia and industry, integrating modeling simulation into research and development, really. And the goal being to increase efficiency of animal clinical trials and to do quantitative risk analysis of development programs.
Fantastic. Yeah, well, thank you for that. So let's ask a few questions for you both. And obviously you have different perspectives. Generable, of course, providing solutions, services to pharma. And of course, Sergey, leveraging those to do clinical trials and drug development. So Eric, starting off with you, could you share with us what are the current challenges and the biggest opportunities in drug development, particularly in oncology?
Yeah, so oncology is one of those most heavily invested areas in healthcare, and yet there's sort of estimated 75% or so of phase 3 oncology clinical trials fail, which is a huge number, an enormous cost to people and capital. In comparison, for example, vaccines, there's about 80% success rate, which is probably where we want to be. So the question is, why is that, right? And before we discover a miracle drug in oncology, which I think doesn't seem to be likely in the near term, we trace this problem to the poor early decision framework. And essentially, lots of compounds enter phase 1 trials and early phase 2 trials, and clinical teams get easily excited when they see a few people shrink tumors, right? And they count these people up and say, oh, 30% of people shrink tumors. This must be a great drug. Everybody gets behind the program, and then once they enroll large trials, this effect goes away, and we unfortunately have failure. Instead of using this kind of very, very noisy, discrete measure of efficacy, what we use is a model-based approach, right? And we have a set of models that take the continuous tumor growth into account. These models kind of figure out how tumor evolves in your body, and it's linked to the clinical endpoint of interest. So that in oncology, that's typically survival, overall survival, progression-free survival. And then we take these estimates from the model, and we adjust them to the target populations, because these few early patients that you observe may look very different from those target populations. And we train these models on lots of clinical trials that have already been completed, right, on thousands of patients. And so we try to use all available information, the biology, the data, to bring much better decision-making tools. And we have shown in some validation studies that it works pretty well. So we're pretty excited about putting it to use.
Yeah, fantastic. And Sergey, we talked about from your perspective, using tools like Generables and the value that they provide. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, thanks, Paul. Yeah, thanks, Eric, for articulating the problem. I just wanted to provide some context for why this is a problem. And Eric hit the nail right on the head. The key challenge is accurate assessment of risk for any given program, not just in oncology, and logically, consequently, for effective portfolio management. So the problem is that it follows from the business model, the current business model in pharma and biotech, which is basically, let's throw mud at the wall and see what sticks, right? And so you basically try to churn out as many candidate drugs as possible, and then weed out the ineffective treatments, drown some puppies, as some people say, and excuse my language. And you want to do this the earlier the better, obviously, right? And the issue there is you have partial, uncertain data, short-term endpoints Eric talked about, and what you really need to know to weed out the losers is to predict long-term outcomes, right? And that's why his approach integrating short-term, long-term outcomes, yeah. But let's just think for a second. Why is it when industry is using this such a wasteful model, right? And the simple answer is we just don't have the tech to design drugs in silico and just make them. I mean, think about it. Imagine Boeing would be building like dozens of airplanes, test flying them, and then the ones that crash just go to the junkyard, right? No one does that. They just do everything, design, test on the computers, and then just build one, okay? And it mostly works, right? As we know. But in pharma, we just have the limited ability to design a therapeutic that way, right? So once it's synthesized, the molecule is synthesized, then there are really just two levers you can use to make it into a drug. One is dose, how much to give to a patient, and then patient subgroups, who to give it to. And the only way to do this is to empirically figure it out. And so that's why so many clinical trials, large, expensive trials, that's why it's so important to assess future potential of the drug, right? And so that's what Eric's talking about. But I just want to say that, it doesn't have to be this way, right? So one sort of way to do this, to think about this, is to turn this problem on its head and say, well, instead of sort of checking in with drugs at certain decision points with risk analysis of the type that Eric's describing, why don't we use assessment of risk as a guiding principle for all of your drug development? So the whole sort of from end to end, early to late trials. And then really sort of use the Bayesian statistics of the type Eric's talking about to integrate all the information, So that would be, I think, a transformative opportunity, building on what Eric's doing right now.
Yeah. And I think that reminds me of our conversation yesterday about, it's more about prioritization in a portfolio versus go, no go in each case. And, you do, obviously there's still risks involved, but you're trying to reduce those. And And I really like the analogy of Boeing and airplanes, Sergey, because I worked at Boeing for 6 years, notably on the 787 Dreamliner program,
right.
which was a hugely successful program.
It's a beautiful plane.
Yeah,
a great plane.
Yeah, we won't talk about the 737 MAX. But that, that was another issue. But yeah, so I think we could have probably an hour-long conversation about the comparisons between drug development and airplane development. So that's fascinating. So, obviously this is a very powerful approach. And so why isn't it being used more broadly, like outside of oncology, not in aerospace? But go ahead.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I mean, it's not even being used that broadly in oncology yet, right? And I think there's sort of three reasons right now, with perhaps with the decreasing order of importance. So one is the recency of innovation itself, which I'll describe in a bit. The adoption by practitioners, which is always a challenge, right? And to a lesser extent, a regulatory framework. So in terms of the innovation itself, right? The models, parts of these models that I'm talking about have been described in the literature, but to get them trained and fit on lots and lots of patients in this very high dimensional regime has only been possible relatively recently. And the underlying tech there is the probabilistic programming language. It's called STAN. My co-founder, Dan Lee, have co-developed it with some collaborators at Columbia University. And the first public release of that was in 2012. So for a programming language that's very, very young. And now it has a lot of adoption, but it took some time. And that really was a quantum leap in computational statistics. Now, just because you have this programming language, you can't just turn that over to clinical investigators. They wouldn't know what to do with it, right? So we have to build tools and infrastructure around it so that non-specialists are able to use them and put them to these very specific use cases that I've been describing. And in fact, this is what we've been doing at Generable for the last few years. And of course, once you have that, convincing people to change the way they do things is always takes time, right? And in the last point I make in terms of the regulatory aspect, a lot of these decisions in the early trials are made within the trial sponsor, right? These are decisions that could be made internally, right? And so that's why the regulatory aspect is not as important here. There's a lot of value that could be derived if these methods were used in phase 3 and registration trials. But if we're going to go there, like we would have to work with the regulator at some point.
Got it. Your thoughts, Sergey?
No, well said, Eric. I just wanted to add that to me, from the inside, so to speak, one of the issues is the business model itself, is the incentive. I mean, this trial and error business model is incentivized by, if the drug makes it to a blockbuster, it becomes a cash cow, paying for all the trial and error sort of prior to that. So sort of perpetuating this reliance on rather just give it a try and then see what happens, instead of modeling this out like you're suggesting. And in terms of adoption, it's just the culture too. Like I've heard people say to me, I don't need calculation models, risk models. I know when I see it, right? I know the drug, it works when I see it. And the other, like, models are not even real. What is that? And yeah. But seriously, one of the issues here is also infrastructure for aggregating clinical trial data, because you can't build these Bayesian models if you don't have access to aggregated data from many clinical trials. And surprisingly, in pharma biotech, it's been very difficult to put this together in one place and retrieve as needed for modeling. But having said that, there's progress. So basically, AstraZeneca, my previous employer, Novartis, is making great progress in creating these data lakes, as they call them, putting all the trials in there. So that's great. On the decision side, people are moving into data-driven decisions, right? So they are talking about probability of success at a given stage. What is it looking like for sort of forward-looking? The problem is there's still a lot of reliance on expert opinion and the gut feel. And that's what Eric's trying to change, is to introduce some more quantitation into there. And maybe lastly, in terms of regulatory, that's an important point, because it does shape how people do their go about R&D, because it's a common sentiment. Well, let's just do what the FDA wants. And what do they want? Well, they want a couple of trials with good p-values, and that's driving that sort of people away from actually learning from the data in using Bayesian models. What is it telling you about the drug? What is the concept, the known concept of the Bayesian p-value? What's the probability you have an effect above a certain threshold? So it's not binary anymore. It's much more useful to practitioners. So
yeah, fascinating. And I think we're coming up on time here, unfortunately. But it sounds like there is, obviously oncology is the first sort of application here, and there's much broader applications to be had. And I really think it's fascinating you created a new programming language, Eric. And it's not named after Stan Kachnowski, right? The Stan.
No, it was not named after Stan. It was named after, first of all, let me be clear. I did not create that language. It was my co-founder, Dan Lee, with collaborators at Columbia. And it's named after Stanislav Ulam, who's a mathematician and known for some work in probability and math.
Very interesting. Well, thank you both. I thought we had 20 minutes, but I think we only had 15. Is that, and Prem, I think you're up next. Is that correct? So thank you, Eric, Sergey. It's been wonderful getting to know what both of you are doing, and obviously this digital innovation in healthcare, life sciences. So fantastic work. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.
Take care.
All right, awesome. Thank you very much, guys. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Sergey. And thank you, Eric, for that wonderful discussion. Hopefully everybody that's tuned in is, has got some great learnings from what the guys were just talking about in the previous segment. So thank you very much for coming on, everybody.